None of the 11 2026 Formula One teams want to be perceived as the strongest, the best, the most competitive going into 2026. But who really is? Because someone's obviously got to be. There have been some big winners, there have been some shocking losers from this 6-day Bahrain test. So what is the pecking order like going in to Australia? Well, my name's Tommo, let's talk about it. We have to, of course, unfortunately start with the worst, and that, of course, is the team in green, who after an almost no-show in Barcelona, in Bahrain, it got worse, and then worse, and then worse again. Like, it didn't bode well on day 6, the final day of Bahrain. Before we even got any running, we had Honda putting a statement out referring to battery-related issues, meaning the run plan on that day would be very limited and consist of only short stints. A part shortage with the PU apparently on their last battery, 6 laps on the final day, none of them timed, 334 laps in total over those 6 days, averaging just 56 per day. Nowhere near the rest, nowhere near good enough. Their fastest time 4 seconds slower than the fastest of the test. Like, after 9 full days of testing across Barcelona and Bahrain, going into Australia, this could be deeply embarrassing. It's all playing out in the public eye. There's talk around the gearbox being an issue as well, who of course Aston Martin are developing themselves for the very first time in-house. Drivability has been a massive issue throughout this test for both Lance and Fernando. On day 4, Lance had a weird lock-up on the rears, put him in the gravel. Definitely didn't look like his fault. On day 5, Fernando's long run came to a very premature end. That was absolutely transmission related. The way Fernando was revving the out of that engine, if you ask me, that was a very, very clear message of frustration, but also exposed what the issue was to the world. That car clearly is very aerodynamically interesting, aggressive. That newie design absolutely has potential, clearly, right? He knows what he's doing and he's created something that looks very out there. 4 months behind on their aero development path. They've done well to create this package, but all elements have to work together. And whether it's the Honda ICE, the Honda battery, or the Aston Martin gearbox, if those bits aren't up to scratch, no amount of aero is going to save you. The hope is that ultimate performance is there. Okay, theoretically it should be. It's just foundationally they seem to be way off. The car is allegedly overweight. They can't put more than a handful of laps together, performance laps, let alone, right, to then diagnose any kind of issues. The car keeps breaking down. Like, I have zero belief that either car is going to get out of Q1, nowhere near getting out of Q1 in Australia, or anywhere near finishing the race. They have absolutely bitten off more than they can chew. The hope is that once they get on top of these fundamentals, they will be in a decent position. But the problem is, it's a relative game, Formula One, and no one else, even Cadillac, is stinking up the place as much as Aston Martin are right now. We should talk about Cadillac next, because they are, of course, objectively, I think it's fair to say, the second least impressive team on the grid, but they've done well to be second, let's be real, and they've been way closer to the rest, at least the back of the pack and P9 and onwards. They need mileage first and foremost. If you ask me, performance should not really be a consideration at all this year. I know they don't want to be embarrassed, but you need to get the fundamentals in place, and so far, pretty good. For a team where the whole deal about keeping, Andretti originally out was because they might, not be anywhere near competitive enough and embarrass themselves. Well, there's another team embarrassing themselves way more than Cadillac. And, finishing last in this regulation set isn't all bad. You get all that CFD and aero time, which I'm sure Cadillac will put to good use eventually when they can start adding performance to this car. This car that is clearly fundamentally low on downforce, as you would expect. However, they have clearly gone about operating their car and running it in a very diligent and prepared manner, right? 586 laps on the board isn't quite up there with most of the rest, but it's not a million miles off either. And with 2 highly experienced pedalers at the wheel who are going to give a ton of valuable feedback and help push the development of this car sooner rather than later, look, they're in a good place. And they're compare them to Aston Martin, they're suffering from, again, opposite issues, right? The fundamentals, the base, the core, Cadillac has. The ultimate performance potential, Aston Martin has. Both teams have one, not the other, but Aston Martin is this massive, you know, all this money that's gone into Silverstone, all this investment, all this hype. Cadillac have started from literally zero. Even Haas took over a bunch of old Marussia stuff, yet they've just made them look very, very silly. Props to you, Cadillac, because Aston Martin are proving it's not that easy. Audi had a difficult Barcelona test. It certainly didn't fill me with a lot of hope. The engine sounded very raw. It still felt very Sauber, ultimately, which has been a mediocre, subpar team for a long time now. They probably made the most visible step forward, if you ask me, of any team from that test going into Bahrain, through the course of Bahrain as well. And yeah, I mean, that's got to be commended, surely. Very good progress from Barcelona to where we are today, to quote Nico Hülkenberg himself. They've gone bold with car design as well. Those side pods changing midway through Bahrain is cool. I'm glad they're pushing the boat out. I'm glad they're putting their ATR that they've accrued over previous years of, again, Sauber mediocrity to pretty good use by the looks of it. But the question's always going to come back to the PU, right? Is Audi, as a sole runner of the Audi power unit, going to be able to get that engine up to speed anywhere near the leading engines on the grid anytime soon? Like, it's a huge ask. Drivability does seem to be an issue. They were locking up a lot, having to do some funky downshifts and not looking particularly stable in the low speed. The refinement will come with time, but again, you compare to, well, particularly Mercedes and Ferrari, who have customers as well doing laps on that engine. You know, Aston Martin, Honda and Audi don't have that. I mean, for reference, right, Mercedes powered teams did 2,998 laps in Bahrain. That is a lot of data, a lot of numbers that could be crunched by Mercedes high performance powertrains. Audi just have their one team that, yes, they did break 700 laps. Very, very good, but still way behind the amount of information that Merc will have. But look, I think their competitive position for me is, you know, it's clear of Cadillac and Aston Martin absolutely in the here and now. Potential to move forward, but solid P9, about where you'd expect them to be. Williams, man, the talk, and the hype and the expectation, and we're writing off everything for 2026. Look, at least they made the Bahrain test. The problem with Williams, even though they set 790 laps in Bahrain, the third highest lap count of any team, is that they feel off. They feel certainly the worst of the Mercedes-powered teams, which is not what they would have wanted. The car seems to lack refinement. Now, would they have put out many of those base fundamental fires if they had turned up in Barcelona and got that mileage in then? Perhaps, right? Because they would have been on a different run plan to all of the other teams, again, bar Aston, because they wouldn't have had that Barcelona test to shake down a lot of the basics, right? So these 790 laps weren't put into the same amount of performance running as the other teams would have done so. The hope is that once they do catch up, that performance will get unlocked, but the car does appear to be overweight. That's what's being reported anyway. With refinement and time, that weight can come down, and that is an easy win in terms of performance for the car. But I can't allow that to distract from the fact that me as an Alex Albon fan, I am very bitterly disappointed. The dream that we were sold is not anywhere near, right? The team has shown that it doesn't have the capacity yet to deliver from an operational output point of view, components, parts, upgrades in time to fight at the very front. We knew that from their lack of visibility at Barcelona, and after Bahrain, I feel the same. And Alpine have usurped them, and it's 1-0 to Enstone versus Grove, because the bare minimum has to be to beat Alpine, the brand new Mercedes customer. And right now, Williams aren't even looking overly close. Now, of course, that can change very quickly, but for the start of the season in Australia, I mean, they've got to be 8th for me, surely. The Racing Bulls car appears to be a little bit tricky to drive, particularly in the low speed as well. Of course, you've got, you know, Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad, who aren't full of, experience in Formula One, but they are two very competent peddlers, no doubt. And that car is on a bit of a knife edge, right? It's going to take some time for them to refine that package, I think. And in a weird roundabout way, you've usually said that for the senior team, right? The junior team's been the easier car to drive, the senior team the tricky one. Maybe this is the strategy, right? So better prepare your junior drivers to jump into the Red Bull seat, make the Toro Rosso into a bucking Bronco, and then right, these kids have got the minerals to make the step up if they can tame it. I am, of course, being facetious. I'm sure the balance and the feel in this car will come in time. And again, look, I think Red Bull Ford have done a top tier job on the powertrain, certainly exceeded my expectations. They put 734 laps down in Bahrain, a superb amount of running, 407 of them coming in the last 3 days of the test. And Arvid Lindblad, 165 laps on day 6, most of anyone on a single day in Bahrain. And just as much as Arvid is a rookie, also because he's a rookie, he doesn't have to unlearn knowledge built across different generations of Formula One. This is all he knows, so maybe that will serve in his favour. Time will tell. It's really difficult to judge and place racing balls at the moment. I'm gonna go P7. They've impressed me more than Williams. I think they'll come out of the gates quicker than Williams. Maybe not by the end of the season, but to start with, well done, racing balls. So far, so good for Alpine. In my pre-season predictions, which, by the way, I am pretty happy with them. I made them after the Barcelona test, and I don't really want to change anyone's position. I put Alpine ahead of Williams, and I'm glad I said that because so far, so good, right? I think that move to a Mercedes engine and gearbox has clearly been vindicated. Deeply embarrassing for Renault to give up on their engine package. However, pragmatic from an F1 team point of view. Alpine don't have to worry about those fundamental baseline foundational elements, be that the power unit and the battery and the gearbox, because that's handled by Mercedes, who clearly very much know what they're doing. They can focus on creating a fantastic aero platform, and so far so good. Almost certainly a strong high-end midfield candidate, certainly in a better position than Williams, like I've already said. Seems to be at the weight limit already, which means that any performance gains are going to have to come through aerodynamic innovation rather than just taking weights off, which can be challenging. We saw, I've mentioned this many a time, right? Sauber at the start of 2022 were very quick because they're at the weight limit, struggled to add performance through aerodynamic innovation, where everyone else just lost weight on their cars and then jumped them. 677 laps is a decent amount. It's 8th most, but there's a group of kind of 4th to 9th where there's barely any laps in it, really, and not too many reliability issues in the way. Of course, Franco did almost drop it with that wonky practice start, but other than that, pretty good. It's been overall a very good 2 weeks. We've got clear directions on what we've got to improve and what's been good, what's been less good. The words of Pierre Gasly. I'll tell you what, Haas, love it. I love this team doing well, and I've actually grown more of a warmth and affiliation, a support for Haas, because I just love an underdog, right? And I was lucky enough I got to go to the Haas factory last year, have a little look round, get an understanding of this relative scale, right, compared to all the other teams, how much smaller they are. And they've had a blinding start to the season. They've got to be incredibly satisfied before wheels have even turned in Australia. They've put themselves in a fantastic position to move forward, and I think if I had to put money on Haas having their strongest year in F1 to date, I would do it. Maybe a tenner, no more than that. This house renovation is costing a disgusting amount of money, but regardless, let's not talk about it. They bought upgrades to the car week 2 of Bahrain testing, and things, again, just remained consistent, solid. I've not got a huge amount to say, because I think Okamatsu has really drilled into this team a efficiency, right, that I think has always been there. They've always punched above their weight, Haas, I think, but now he's really got the wheels turning and everyone moving in the same direction. Almost 800 laps on the board is incredibly impressive. Both drivers, Ollie and Esteban, felt very happy and had basically only positives to say, minimal in terms of breakdowns and issues at all, really. And always nice to have that Ferrari power unit in the back with a nice small turbo, which means quick starts off the line. I'll tell you what, look, we don't know how that small turbo thing is going to play out in, you know, longer circuits like Monza and Baku and Spa and the rest, but around a track like Bahrain, you got to rate Haas up there, ain't you? And in a year where Cadillac's coming in and potentially usurping Haas as the big American force in Formula One, I'm glad Haas have taken this opportunity to step up. It's been a very good test for us. Every time we've put the car down on the day, we've found performance. I'm looking forward to going racing in Melbourne. Esteban Ocon, yes, please. McLaren, of course, coming off the back of 2 Constructors' Championships in a row, are going to very much struggle to hold on to that. I think the customer team tax is going to bite this year because they're in a top 4 with 3 other teams who all have their own works engines that they have control over. And this is the problem, right? An Alpine can take on a Mercedes power unit and move away from being a works team to be more competitive and not finish last, right? But also, if Alpine want to win world titles, they probably should have persisted with their own engine and just hired better people, made better management decisions, be less mid generally. McLaren are in a position right now where they don't have the battery management understanding of this Mercedes PU in the same way that Mercedes do. And that is clearly going to be absolutely pivotal this season in Formula One. However, besides the point, still a very strong, very positive test for the Papayans. 817 laps on the board, more than anybody else in Bahrain. McLaren have proven not only can they create a fantastic car, but they can do it within a regulation cycle and jump up the grid, right? The way they did that in ground effect in 2023 is pretty unprecedented. Apart from Lando missing a chunk of day 6, it was pretty clean running. Now, McLaren did seem more worried than most about the whole practice start thing, which indicates that they feel like race starts could be a bit of an issue for them. Getting that Mercedes turbo spooled up again, that's another element where they're not going to have the same understanding as the works team about how that operates on a finer level. Generally speaking, I think Lando seemed a bit more comfortable than Oscar throughout the test with the car underneath him. That bodes well for the reigning world champion. However, McLaren's quickest lap was set by Oscar Piastri at 1:32.861, third fastest time overall. Quite a bit off the quickest time, but it's up there. And look, it just remains to be seen going into Australia and going into this season, are they going to be able to keep up with Mercedes? Because from an aero point of view, no question, but McLaren were not running the definitive Mercedes power unit specification in Bahrain that Mercedes were. They will have it in Australia, of course McLaren will, but again, this is just another element where that customer team tax feels like it's going to hurt them more this year. I mean, fair play Red Bull. Pretty damn impressive. I think all of the rumours linking Max to Mercedes were fueled by an anticipation that Red Bull were going to be absolutely nowhere with their power unit. And certainly me, I was, I think they'll be 4th best team because I think they'll be behind, the 2 Mercedes cars and the Ferrari at the front. And maybe they still will, right? But they're certainly not going to embarrass themselves because they've carried themselves fantastically in this test. I mean, Mercedes in particular have been very, very complimentary of the Red Bull powertrain. And yes, maybe that is tactics to take away attention from themselves, of course, but also I don't think there's zero truth there because Max and Isaac have clearly been able to get performance out of this car, and both drivers have sounded very, very happy with the package underneath them. I think we'll never be satisfied, but like I said, at least we're not breaking down. I think no one really expected that from the start, that we would go at the garage without exploding. That has been very positive. The fine words of Mr. Max Verstappen. This power unit was always going to be a massive unknown. There's been a lot of movement at Red Bull in the last 12 months, right, with personnel dropping away and things changing, but Pierre Wache and most of his technical team running this car from an aero point of view at least have been consistent, and I absolutely back them to create a very, very strong aerodynamic platform. And look, on the PU front, they've built it from the ground up in Milton Keynes on site. They've got a bunch of ex-Honda personnel who decided to make the move over when Honda initially announced that they were leaving F1, and brought in personnel from Mercedes and other power unit manufacturers, and have clearly put together a very, very competent starting place. I mean, the total lap count wasn't amazing, 672 in total, only 5 less than Alpine. Again, not a million miles off the ballpark of just over 700 laps that most teams set. Isaac Hadjar lost a bit of running on the morning of day 4, but other than that, they've got to be happy. Like, they're in a good place. And as much as Max Verstappen himself has been very, very critical of these rules, again, from just his personal point of view, yeah, I don't think he's going to love these cars, but I think he'll learn how to drive them very, very quickly and do what needs to be done to win if the opportunity presents itself. Stefano Domenicali seems to think he'll come around to the rules. I'm not so sure. And what I do actually think, really now, we've already kind of seen enough to suggest that if it doesn't work at Red Bull, I think Max is out of F1 entirely. There's no way in these regulations I see him moving even to a Mercedes if they've got the quickest car, because I just don't think he would be interested. He said it himself, if he wins 4 world titles or 8, he doesn't really care. And whether you like Max or not, you should absolutely respect that level of transparency, honesty, just being genuine, right? That's what we want from our sports stars. You know what impressed me most about Ferrari in this test? They did make clear steps throughout it, where they started on day 1 of 6 and day 6 of 6 were very different places. They bought upgrades, which we'll get into a little bit more in a sec. And even the drivers, right? I think at the start of this Bahrain test, Lewis seemed to be struggling with the rear more than Charles, but by the end of it, it felt much more on a par. Both drivers looked pretty happy with the balance and the responsiveness in that, you know, windy Bahrain, slow speed corner conditions. And I even get a sense that they were both trying to kind of mask their positivity. They don't want to get ahead of themselves, especially driving for Ferrari, right? If you feed the Italian media too many positives, they might get a bit carried away, and then they will drag you down just as much as they push you up. Now, innovation-wise, very cool on this car. I would say, outside, ironically, of the Aston Martin, the Ferrari has bought the most in terms of, wow, that's cool. I mean, the flipping backwards rear wing, like, sick. If that makes the actual car, I'm not so sure. Like, would it be legal? Because doesn't the DRS on the rear wing have to fail shut? I don't know if that would, but they tested it. They didn't use it for the whole test. They used it briefly, and that would be amazing if that's all out of date. Then there's that flow condition device towards the back of the exhaust. Like, again, they've pushed the boat out, Ferrari, as they should, with the resource and the facility they have. They've made some fascinating engineering choices, and I hope it pays off for them. Again, the small turbo thing around a track like Bahrain seems to work well. It will work well off the starts everywhere, but particularly with a lot of low speed, high traction corners, they will benefit from that increased acceleration. And they set the headline time of the test, a 1:31.992, faster than anybody from Charles Leclerc. Have they shown their hand too soon? Perhaps. It was only a couple of seconds off the 2025 Bahrain pole position time, by the way, which is pretty damn impressive. I know the conditions are different and you can never compare 1-to-1 different tyres as well, but that was 3 years into the ground effect regulation. Like, we're already way closer, I think, than the FIA certainly expected these cars to be at this time. And more upgrades in the pipeline, perhaps ahead of Australia. Look, Ferrari have set the standard before at the start of a new regulation cycle. I'm thinking 2022, and they couldn't keep it up. Can they this time? Can this be the year? Maybe. You still have to come back to Mercedes, right? Not great laps at the start of the Bahrain test, but all in all, you know, 714 in total, 6th most, bang in the middle. It's been a stellar pre-season for Mercedes, right? Got the 200 kilometers in their shakedown, then in the Barcelona shakedown, got more laps than anybody else, and certainly set the standard. Had a couple of issues. No one's been perfect. Kimi had a pneumatic issue on day 6, which cost him some running, but otherwise Mercedes have just diligently gone about their business and look like the team to beat. It just looked refined. The car, the drivers, the equality between both drivers as well. Kimi and George both seem to be seemingly quite equally happy with the car underneath them. I mean, day 4 was like a prime example of just how good it was. George Russell put in a lovely 9-lap race stint, 77 laps in total. Then Kimi jumped in, went fastest of anyone with a 32.8, and then did 79 laps, 156 total. Lovely jubbly, happy days, job done. And as I mentioned with McLaren, right, Mercedes will understand the battery management, will understand the turbo spooling, will understand all of the nuances of this power unit more than any of their customer teams. And I think particularly at the start of these regulations, at the start of 2026, that will pay dividends. The biggest issue for Mercedes is, of course, the engine, the legality. There has been a proposed hot test, 130 degrees, to go in from August 1st. That has not been voted on yet, but almost certainly will go through. And clarity is important in the rules. Will Mercedes have to change their engine? They still might not have to. We don't know if that test would even bring up any kind of failure, any kind of illegality. And I mean, in my opinion, if there is a way of measuring the compression ratio while the engine is hot, then that should have been the way of measuring it in the first place. And it is an oversight to have only said cold. But look, I said it before, I say it again. If the rule is your compression ratio has to be 16:1 when the engine's cold, and your compression ratio is 16:1 when the engine's cold, then you're fine. And if you can find a way for the compression ratio to increase, when actually typically it would decrease at temperature, then well done, you've engineered success. And the other team should have thought of it, and they didn't. But that's just my opinion. I do kind of agree with Toto that it is a bit of a storm in a teacup. I almost feel the same about this as the flexi wing stuff. I think they'll bring in another test and nothing is really going to change. Remember how much everyone was banging on the flexi wings, being like, oh my god, it's going to flip the competitive order, and like nothing happened apart from like the Alpine got slower. We will see, but as things stand, Mercedes absolutely in 26 still the team to beat. As always, let me know all of your thoughts and feelings. Going into 2026, I am very excited now for this. My body, my mind, my soul is ready for F1 to return. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.